I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes! Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to those of you listening on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and I am here with my incredible co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Yes, and together, Rebecca and I are going to craft an unforgettable hour of radio called For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment. And we talk about them in the ways that they affect you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of the trees and the fish and the insects and your pets and pretty much everybody and everything, because, like it or not, we're all wrapped up together here on this wonderful little planet called Earth. And here on Earth, in this part of the Earth right now, it's kind of cold and gray and nasty out there, so be careful if you're driving. It's definitely getting slippery. As regular listeners know, that I'm back here from being down there in Florida, where it was all like warm and sunshiny, and I don't know. I'm just glad to be back where it's cold and gray the way it's supposed to be right now. So happy to be here, and also
it's actually semi-appropriate March weather right now.
Yeah,
like where this is the way that March is supposed to be.
Yeah, it's kind of normal.
Yeah, for a second. Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah. So we got a good show for you today. We're going to chat for a little bit here. Please call in and join us at any time at 877-909-1007. That's 877-909-1007. Or you can text at 419-973-5841. And this is a happy occasion. Today is a very special show because we had something happen this past week in Ohio where it's a story we've been covering for many years.
Oh, brace yourself for some Schadenfreude, people.
Yeah. Larry Householder.
You're so very Freudian about his Schaden.
Yes. Larry Householder has been found guilty of let's see, what was the exact charge? Oh, racketeering.
and there was much rejoicing.
Excellent. Yes, there was.
Yes. Those of us who have been, involved in this story from the beginning know that this was a long time coming and well deserved, I must say, because
bye-bye, Larry.
Yeah, he was accused of taking somewhere around $60 million worth of bribes in order to give First Energy House Bill 6, the terrible, terrible energy policy. We're going to have more on that in a little bit because I managed to catch an interview with Jake, who was the Cleveland.com reporter who sat through the entire 7 weeks of that trial. And
whoa, that's a strong man.
Yes, I have to hand it to the media, especially the print media, newspapers of Ohio, because they really didn't flinch. They didn't look away from this and just kind of let it slide. they stuck with it. But Cleveland.com did one of the best jobs of covering this scandal from the very beginning. So we'll get to him at about quarter after. And then we'll hear from our advertisers and patrons after the interview. And then we'll hear from Rebecca. And Rebecca, what will you be talking about today?
Hulun Lake in China.
Oh, sounds pretty. All right. And then after Rebecca, we'll have some ecological news. And hopefully, as I said, at some point, we'll hear from you at 877-909-1007 or texting 419-973-5841. And I'd very much like to hear your opinion on this, on the conviction of Larry Householder and his right-hand guy, Borges, which is like, it's kind of like a villain name, isn't it? You know,
A little, yeah.
Borges, you know, fetch me a legislator, Borges. So, yeah. So what do you think? I mean, if you follow the show, you know, you've been following this scandal and you know what the terrible thing this House Bill 6 was. Are you happy that he's convicted now? Are you afraid he might not actually go to jail because they're talking conviction? But as you'll hear in the interview, I have no idea how he can get out of this because he pretty much impaled himself on the witness stand. I mean, he really just, his whole defense has been, I didn't do anything wrong. They gave me money to write a bill that helps First Energy. It hurts all the ratepayers in Ohio. I wrote them the bill. What, you know, where's the corruption there?
Right.
So,
I just it was a coincidence, purely coincidental that
Yeah.
I felt like writing this bill after they gave me a giant amount of money.
right. So, yeah. So what do you think? So, before that, though, I do want to mention that yesterday was March 11th, which was the 12th anniversary of the Fukushima nuclear disaster. And most of the mainstream media was very studious about completely ignoring it. And it's something that we can't forget if we care about ecology and the environment, because in a very real way, that disaster is still going. The nuclear plants they still have to pump water over the molten cores. And if they were to ever stop, if the pumps were to fail, the cores would start melting again. And you know, the meltdowns would continue. And as they pump that water over, a lot of it is getting goes through the groundwater and down into the ocean, but a lot of it gets caught and they capture it and they filter it, quote unquote, and then they store it in tanks on the site. And one of the big controversies we're going to talk about is they want to dump that water, which is radioactive, and it's filled with radioactive tritium. They want to just dump that into the Pacific. The Japanese government does. And it's pretty terrible. So we mark the date every year with Unplugged Nuclear Power last night at my household. And what we were doing, there's 4 levels of Unplugged Nuclear Power. One is just simple conservation. Just go around and turn off extra lights. Level 2 is severe conservation. You go and you turn off everything that's not essential. Like, for example, lights. We don't need most lights. I mean, now that all our cell phones have flashlights on them, you don't really need all those artificial lights going all the time, but that's severe. And then level 3 is disconnecting from the grid. And we were at level 4 yesterday, which is you try to put more power on the grid with solar than you take off the grid. And I'm happy to report that by doing the severe conservation, we were able to do that in my household. Even though it was kind of a cloudy day, we generated 13 kilowatt hours of power using my little 6 kilowatt solar system. And I only took 4 kilowatt hours off the grid. So just by conserving, I actually generated more than 3 times the power I used. And that felt good because, that's power that isn't creating wastes that are going to be killing people for 200,000 years. And that's power that's not contributing to global warming. And it's going out to my neighbors. I mean, the power I was generating was literally helping to power my neighbors' households. and it's it was a good feeling. So, but it was a quiet time, without the lights, without the screens. It's always a very sort of introspective kind of a day, except when I went with my friends to watch Cocaine Bear. There was no introspection in that movie at all.
Zero.
Yeah, it's. In fact, after the movie, my friend said, "What do you think?" And I had to go, think?
I've done no such thing.
I don't think there was any thinking.
No.
Now that you mention it. But it was fun. It was a good day. It was a somber day, and I'm once again, people all over the world. I know for sure people were doing this in Japan and Uruguay and France, and so lots of people did unplug nuclear power, and we were very grateful for all of them. So, all right. Well, I think now it's time to switch over to our interview. Let's see. I think it doesn't really need much introduction. Josh, just go ahead and let her rip. All right. Jake Zuckerman, welcome to For Agreed Future. Could you just please remind us who you're with?
My name is Jake Zuckerman. I'm a reporter with the Cleveland Plain Dealer and Cleveland.com.
Right. And this must be quite an evening for you because it's the culmination of a story that you've been following for how long?
Since I moved to Ohio, so since about January 2020, which isn't even the beginning of it.
Right. But I think Cleveland.com has done one of the best jobs of all the media in the state, and a lot of media have been covering this story of kind of getting the ins and outs of this labyrinth. An incredibly complicated story. Maybe you could just zip through some of the figures that are and some of the organizations that have been involved in this whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, the big picture here is that Larry Householder, who is then the Speaker of the House, and his people generally started this nonprofit called Generation Now, and it's known as a 501c4 under the tax code, and these kinds of entities can lawfully accept unlimited sums of money from corporate donors or from individuals, and it can spend them in certain but not unlimited ways on politics, but the draw of the use of these things is that they never have to disclose their donors. And a Householder is accused of, secretly controlling this nonprofit, which he's not allowed to do, and according to the prosecutors, that $60 million bought him to run a PR campaign to support this bailout bill that Householder championed. But in reality, the money functioned as a bribe. It gave Householder this immense political benefit of getting his people into office who would name him into the House Speaker's role. And there were also personal payments. Some of the money wound up paying down his credit card bills, paying off some legal debt, paying for some home repairs to a Florida house. He was accused, along with his political strategist who oversaw the nonprofit and the races that they were following in the allied candidate races. They charged a couple of lobbyists, some of whom pleaded guilty and went on to testify against Larry Householder. And they charged a lobbyist named Matt Borges, and he's accused of paying a $15,000 bribe to someone who was organizing the campaign to try to get enough signatures to repeal House Bill 6, to get rid of this bailout that Householder championed.
Right, that would be Tyler Fairman.
Yes, he was office, that's correct.
Yeah, and the plot was supposedly hatched over a steak dinner?
Yeah, so according to the prosecution, this plan came to be in about January 2017, and Larry Householder had just won his re-election bid in 2016, so just as a lowly member in the Ohio House. But he got on board First Energy's corporate jet as it flew from Akron to Washington, D.C., where they were going to President Trump's inauguration. If you remember, it was, it's always a big gala, black tie sort of weekend in D.C., and it had that extra Donald Trump flavor going on there, and the householder was going to a number of events, but according to the prosecutors, he and executives at First Energy had this series of steak dinners at nice restaurants, fancy DC restaurants, where they're accused of coming up with this plan where First Energy would fund householders. Effectively, it's a campaign. It's a campaign within a campaign to become the Speaker of the House. And they would fund that effort, and in exchange, householder would pass this legislative bailout that First Energy had been fighting for years, because these nuclear plants they owned just weren't making money. You know, any way you cut it, they were hemorrhaging money. They were technically owned by a subsidiary of First Energy, but that subsidiary was way underwater. It was having an effect on First Energy's books. You know, I mean, these were losers, and their only solution was to get a state subsidy to prop them up.
Right, and that subsidy basically affected everyone in Ohio because it would have added charges to their bill to bail out the nuclear plants.
That's correct. And it also, part of that bill, it kind of swelled as it went through the legislative process, and it became not just a nuclear bailout, but also a coal bailout. And there's a certain irony that all the law enforcement attention got a repeal of the nuclear bailout. So, you know, you and I do not pay that on our electric bills right now, but we do still pay the coal bailout that was passed as part of House Bill 6.
Yeah, and that's especially ironic because the initial version of House Bill 6 was billed as a carbon reduction bill, because supporting the nuke plant supposedly would mean less carbon, and it's very ironic that the last bit of subsidy remaining is actually subsidizing coal plants.
Yeah, the actual short title of the bill is the Ohio Clean Air Act, which obviously coal is not a means of cleaning up the air.
Right, especially those coal plants which are grandfathered in and don't have to have pollution control equipment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what has it been like in the courtroom these past weeks and months?
Yeah, I mean, we've been in there for 7 weeks, and I won't lie to you, there have been boring moments, but some of the testimony and some of the evidence we've seen have been pretty shocking. I mean, we've gotten a better sense of some of these characters. You know, there were two really big moments to me that stuck out in my mind. There was this instance in October 10th, 2018, and this was first mentioned in testimony from Juan Cespedes, who was a First Energy Solutions lobbyist. That's the subsidiary that owns these plants. And he pleaded guilty and ended up testifying against Householder. But he said he was present for a meeting with Larry Householder, a lobbyist named Bob Klafke, and a few other lobbyists for First Energy Solutions. This is right in the run-up to the 2018 elections. And Larry needs his people to win these elections, so he has a house that's loyal to him and will name him Speaker. We're in October, you know, this is when the TV commercials are stuffed with campaign ads and, you know, all those nasty negative ads. And Generation now needs money. And we see these communications of First Energy officials and householder people, you know, asking and needling and poking at First Energy, asking for some money into Generation Now. And eventually, this meeting occurs in householders' political offices, and according to Juan Cespedes, obviously Bob Klafke, slides a $400,000 check across a conference room table and says, our client cares very much about this issue being a subsidy for these nuclear plants. And eventually Larry Householder looks at the check and sees all those zeros and says, they certainly do, or something to that effect. And, you know, I mean, the allegation was always a bribe, but this was just the most vivid instance. You know, most of these transfers are actually wire transfers, and there's not necessarily eye contact. But here is a conversation in a room with these men making eye contact with one another. They're talking about a nuclear subsidy, and suddenly $400,000 goes from point A to point B. So that was just kind of a jaw-dropping moment in the courtroom, for me at least, and I suspect for others. And another similar moment from that same witness came when he testified that John Kiani, the executive chairman of First Energy Solutions, stood to gain $100 million personally from the sale of these plants once they were subsidized. When they're subsidized, they're a more lucrative asset. They're more likely to give a return to investors. They're easier to sell. And nuclear plants are notoriously hard to sell. They're very expensive and regulated. This one was losing money. And that is just a jaw-dropping sum of money when you think about $100 million to one individual. So, it was boring at times, but then sometimes you just hear these shocking behind-the-scenes wire transfers and text messages, all the stuff you never get to see that kind of gives you a sense of what is animating the political scene in Ohio.
Wow, yeah. I didn't realize about the $100 million benefit. Who was that going to again?
His name is John Kiani. He's the executive chairman of First Energy Solutions. He actually, according to the testimony, he operated a hedge fund. He's an Enron guy, which is just another of those too good to be true details of the story.
Wow.
He came from Enron and was working at a hedge fund. And when First Energy Solutions, that subsidiary, was in bankruptcy, which it declared in 2018, he bought up some of the debt that these plants had incurred, and him purchasing that control of this company as it spun off and became an independent company from First Energy. But before that time, while this is still a subsidiary of First Energy, he is accused of some of the, I'd call it some of the operational side of paying these bribes. I mean, he's in contact with Larry Householder's people are in contact with Larry Householder and Larry Householder's people. And there are even some text messages where he was asking Borges and Smedes, how are the Black Ops going? With Black Ops being a reference to just some of the bribing and the dirty trickery that was at play to thwart the effort to repeal House Bill 6. So he was a person who I'd say came out of this trial. He has not been charged with a crime, but he came out pretty bruised and battered. And obviously, there's a lot of speculation right now of will he be charged with a crime? What is going on with these First Energy people that they haven't been charged?
Wow. So there were two people who had pled guilty already and were cooperating witnesses. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then there was also a third person who was implicated who committed suicide.
Correct. That was Neil Clark, and he kind of acted as, he called himself a proxy several times for Householder. But, a lot of the way these C4s are supposed to work, technically they can't be controlled by the politician who benefits from them. So Neil Clark came to play this role of, I'm Larry Householder's proxy, and he committed suicide.
Yeah. So what happens now? They're talking, Householder and Borges are talking like they're going to appeal, but from what I read about some of the things that happened, especially when Householder was on the stand and being cross-examined, it kind of sounds like they dug their own grave.
Yeah, I mean, they both, Householder more directly than Borges, but they both intimated plans to appeal. And Borges did not testify in his own defense. Larry did. I don't know how I feel about the phrase dug their own graves, but I'd say that Larry Householder's testimony on direct examination, just to be candid, it came off as dishonest to me. I thought he was making statements that just didn't hold water. And just by factor of timing, he ended up closing out the day with this direct examination, so the prosecutors had a whole night to really go over it. And they came out the next morning guns blazing. I mean, just absolutely going after him. And they really just had this pretty devastating showing where they caught him in several, whether you want to lies, falsehoods, untruths, whatever verbiage you want to use. They made a pretty clear showing that Larry Householder wasn't telling the truth. And not all of these were direct evidence of bribery, but they just seemed to show this willingness to lie and this belief that he can get away with it. I think they really damaged his credibility in the trial. And yeah, I mean, the jury came away thinking he was a liar after that. So that certainly didn't help his prospects.
And one of the things Larry Household's been saying from the beginning, and still maintains, is that the bill behind all this, House Bill 6, was actually a good energy bill, but didn't Ohio make headlines when it passed as having as being like one of the most regressive energy bills ever?
Progressive, absolutely not. I mean, this was not a progressive bill.
Regressive, not progressive.
Oh, regressive. Okay, that sounds more right. Yes. Yeah, there was a Vox headline that said, the headline was something to the effect of, Ohio just passed the worst energy bill of the 21st century, which is obviously an opinionated statement, but Ohio, it is a fact that Ohio now has the weakest renewable portfolio standard laws, which are laws that force utilities to purchase renewable electricity instead of, say, coal or gas-generated fuel. It ended our energy efficiency program, which allowed utilities to charge customers about $1 and use that money to fund basically different, like the big ones I'd say are things like heat pumps or smart thermostats and other home devices that will reduce electricity. So the idea was keep the utilities whole, but get Ohioans to use less electricity. Those programs are gone. There was a coal bailout in there. There was something called decoupling in there, which, to spare the boring, wonky policy stuff, it charged ratepayers $50 million a year, and that money went to First Energy, the parent company, not the subsidiary. So it was a mix of regressive legislation and just capture. I mean, some of it really had no serious policy goal other than to give First Energy money.
Wow. Well, we're just about out of time. Anything you want to add quickly?
Just the big question for me is what is going to happen with these First Energy executives? You know, it's this huge plot hole. There's someone who is convicted of taking a bribe, but no one who has been accused of paying it. So something's got to give there.
All right. Thanks so much, Jake.
No problem. Thanks for having me on.
And thank you, folks, for listening. What did you think? I mean, we talk about this show every day. Every time we're on, we say it's about your wealth, your health, your happiness. And even though I and a whole bunch of other people and organizations fought this bill on environmental grounds, whenever corruption like this succeeds, it ends up costing you money. Okay, that's why corruption is bad. Because, you know, if it's just these people off making deals, but, you know, as long as it doesn't hurt your pocketbook or as long as it doesn't hurt the environment, people are kind of like, well, who cares? But the thing is, this kind of corruption always does hurt your pocketbook and messes up your environment. And in fact, the worst provisions of House Bill 6 have been repealed. The decoupling and the subsidies for the nuke plants, those have been repealed. But all the other bad stuff in House Bill 6 is still in law. It's still the force of law. And in fact, every day, $180,000 gets taken from Ohioans and given to these two coal plants, one in Indiana and one in the southern border of Ohio. And those are two of the most polluting coal plants in the country, and which are causing, it's very well documented, they're causing children to have asthma down there, the exhaust, or, you know, the smokestacks from those coal plants. And so it's hurting our wealth because it's taking money from us. It's hurting the health and happiness of the people who live in southern Ohio, especially around Cincinnati. And that's what happens with corruption. It's inevitable. So what do you think? Are you happy a householder got convicted? Do you think he's going to get away with it in the long run because he says he's going to appeal? Really like to hear your opinions on this. So give us a call, 877-909-1007, or text us if you don't want to, if you're shy about talking on the radio. You can send a text to 419-973-5841. All right. Well, that brings us to our advertisers and patrons. Hooray! For Green Futures brought to you by the Ecofill Shop. The Ecofill Shop is located at 115 West Mary in Bowling Green, Ohio. They sell lots of stuff there, cosmetics, bath and body, home and garden, cleaning, towels, knickknacks, candles, fragrances, and more. They sell all these things without plastic containers. The whole purpose of the Ecofill Shop is to eliminate plastic. Customers love them. Summer says, I'm loving the products they offer, exclamation point. It's sensible and affordable, all while being eco-friendly and plant-based, eliminating the unnecessary use of chemicals. And that's just one of many glowing testimonials you'll see at their website, ecofillshop.com. And I am one of the customers of the Ecofill Shop. Before I came in this morning, I shaved using my shaving brush and my little bar of shaving soap that I bought at the Ecofill Shop. And if you're interested, give them a call, 419-944-8862. Talk to the owner, Jossie, who's very passionate about the environment. That's why she started this shop, actually. Or you can check out their website, ecofillshop.com, or better yet, just drop in and visit them at 115 West Mary in Bowling Green. That's the Ecofill Shop. And For Green Futures also brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They restore wildlife habitats, and they lead people on outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy, from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. And there's lots of ways to get a hold of them. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. That's 419-353-1897. Another is to go to their website, wcparks.org. And you can also go to any social media and search for WC Parks. And we had a caller. We just missed you. Just call right back. We'll catch you this time. Yeah. So those are our wonderful, wonderful sponsors. And let's hear from that wonderful caller again. You can call back at 877-909-107. We're ready to pounce this time. And Rebecca, that brings us to you. What are we talking about this week?
Indeed. Well, this week's short segment is inspired by the production of Xanadu, currently at the Collingwood Art Center. I believe the last performance is today at 3 o'clock, so you're going to have to rush and get those tickets. But Xanadu is actually not a giant roller skating rink in the sky somewhere. Strictly speaking, no.
I thought they made a movie about that.
Yeah,
that wasn't a documentary.
No, it was not.
Okay, all right.
It was not. Xanadu was created by somebody named Kublai Khan, who I believe was Genghis Khan's son.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was supposed to be a gigantic pleasure palace. They thought it was legendary for many years, and then they found the ruins of it near, I think, Chengdu or Chengdu something. You can Xanadu, Chengdu, I don't know. Yeah, so it's a real thing, and I could not figure out exactly where it was. Like nothing came up, but it is in the it is in the Chinese province of Inner Mongolia. What it is now. So, which is also the home of the subject of this week's short segment, Hulun Lake. That's China. China has Great Lakes, and they got some great problems, just like we do over here. Hulun Lake is the largest lake in northern China. Apparently, it also goes by the name Dalai Nor, meaning ocean lake, or Hulun Nur, foot lake. Is it like real foot lake? I don't know. Is it the shape of a foot? One wonders. So yeah, its major inflows are the Krill River and the Oshuun Gol, which is a stream. Apparently, that just means brook, Oshuun or Gol. We're not sure which. Its major outflow is something called the Mutnaya Protoka, which is a large current. Now I worked real hard. I'm gonna try and get this right. Apparently, the Mutnaya Protoka current comes together with the Hartar River? No. Harlar River? No, it's the Hylar River. That's what it is. The Hylar River. It's a tough one. Yeah, it comes together. The Mutnaya Protoka and the Hylar River come together to form the Argun River, which eventually connects to the Amur River Basin system. And one of the reasons that this is kind of important is that Genghis Khan really had a pretty substantial effect on history. And his religion was Tengrism, which is a blend of shamanism, totemism, and animism, popular in Central Asia.
Sounds fun.
Yeah. Well, he thought it was. Yeah. The Mongols, the Kuns, Bulgars, Turkic, and Altai peoples have all practiced the religion or still do. Although it's very popular in Mongolia. And this was really like Genghis Khan really kind of directly worshipped nature. You know, he got all his inspiration for part of his deal was that he wanted to preserve the herding culture. So it's kind of like, you know, the one number from Oklahoma, can the rangers and the farmers be friends? According to Genghis Khan, they could be friends after he exterminated large amounts of them. He's still very unpopular in China. I briefly had a Chinese brother-in-law, for Hong Kong Chinese by way of Australia, and he had a really direct personal dislike for Genghis Khan, who has been dead for a very long time.
They're still holding a grudge.
Yeah, they are still ticked off at him. He made himself very unpopular. But yeah, so some environmental issues, much like the Great Lakes in this hemisphere. There's been a drop in water levels in the past few decades in Hulun Lake, and probably there's another lake around there too. And there are high levels of phosphorus and nitrogen, probably, I'm guessing, from neighboring farm fields, possibly, which lead to eutrophication and algal blooms, which I looked it up. Eutrophication is, in fact, nutrient-induced increases in phytoplankton production. So algal bloom is kind of part of the definition of eutrophication. It's sort of an inevitable result of that.
Right, and then specifically, once those bloomed algae die and start decomposing, that's the eutrophication process.
Yippers.
That produces methane in the water, and it's nasty.
And I don't know if they got cyanobacteria like we do that these algae put out when they expire or not, but yeah, it's not good, whatever it is. There was an article, according to an article from the Science of the Total Environment from January 2022. There's a ongoing study that they're doing about the bacterial communities in this lake. And one thing is that there are big changes, seasonal changes in bacterial diversity. And also the most important phyla of critters in there are Protobacteria, Actinobacteria, and Bacteroidetes, whatever that is. There were a whole bunch of names on this study. We literally do not have time for me to try to pronounce them all. But the number one guy who's listed first is Yongquan Shang. Anyway, I looked at pictures. They had pictures of this lake. It's really pretty looking to me. I think it's beautiful. The reviews, however, did complain that it's completely closed in the winter, and also the toilets are in a deplorable condition. 3 out of 4 were broken. It's not good. So, also the beach looked maybe kind of rocky. I don't know. But yeah, the pictures they had showed it being very, very calm with no just kind of ripples, no large waves. I wonder if it's like that all the time, because it's like, yeah, more like a Scottish loch or something, and less like a North American Great Lake, or possibly, I don't know, that might be just what they think tourists like. You know, maybe they're thinking, oh, we can't show this beach with a big, scary-looking waves. It'll scare the tourists away, because they don't understand that American Midwesterners don't have much of a sense of self-preservation that way. So we like the waves big and dramatic and life-threatening.
Sometimes it's good.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Oh, is that your report?
That's my report.
All right. Thank you, Rebecca. An interesting lake.
Strikes me as worth a gander if you ever happen to be in northern China.
Yeah. I've never heard of it before, so yeah. All right. Great. So now on to ecological news, and I just want to repeat to our caller, try again. Persistence is very important in life. We're ready to take your call this
Give
time.
him the other number, because that it might be discouraged. Feeling discouraged about making phone calls.
Well, let's see.
The text number.
Text number 419-973-5841. Or you could try the call-in line again, 877-909-1007.
Whatever floats your boat.
Yeah. Great. All right, so now, ecological news. Here we go. First story. This comes to us from phys.org. Phys.org. Where is your squid coming from? It's a report on March 10th. And it turns out that squid are in trouble because most of the squid that you get served in restaurants and stuff has come from unregulated areas, mostly in the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean, with a little bit off the east coast of Africa. But there's no kind of regards to the populations, and apparently they did a study using satellites. And they just looked for squid boats. And apparently every single day, 24/7, there's 150,000 to 250,000 squid boats out on the open ocean, the unregulated ocean. And we know that if that's allowed to continue, the squid fishery is going to collapse.
Squid really sounds to me like something you would eat on a dare, but so I don't understand why people want to eat that much of it. Maybe once just so you can find out what it's like, but I guess people like it. I don't know.
I'll tell you a little secret about me.
Yeah. Are you a squid eater?
Well, I'm Sicilian, right, by heritage.
Right.
And we grew up on the Mediterranean eating squid.
So you probably eat anything that comes out of the water.
For thousands of years.
Just about.
And I have this reaction when I get good squid and like it hits the roof of my mouth. I get like this squid high. I get like this I just feel happy. It just causes me to feel happy. I don't know what it is, probably some enzyme or something, who knows, but and nobody else I know gets this, but I love squid. But now I have to cut back on it because now I know it's coming from.
Yes, you do. It's a special treat.
Yeah, maybe once a year now. I don't know. Makes me sad. Next story. We're sticking with the ocean theme this week. Going off to the Antarctic Ocean, and the krill genome has been sequenced. And krill are those little tiny crustaceans that are just about 6 millimeters long there. And it turns out that those little tiny krill have the largest genome in the animal kingdom. They're more complex in terms of their DNA than humans are. In fact, their genome is what they call 48 giga base pairs, which is 48 billion base pairs in their genome, whereas humans, with all our complicated hair and brains and all that stuff, we're only 6.2 giga base pairs. So krill are 8 times as complex as humans, genetically speaking. They're also the largest. They're the most biomass in the entire animal kingdom is krill. Nothing else compares. Whales, humans. And they're literally the base of the Antarctic food chain because they're the only critters that go from the top of the water down to the depths every day, and they move nutrients from top to bottom. And without them, the entire food web would collapse in Antarctica. So no more whales, no more fish, no more seals. So they're really important, and they finally sequenced their genes. And they haven't figured the whole thing out yet, as you might guess, since it's so complicated. That's why it took so long to, they've sequenced a lot of other genomes much more quickly, but they finally got the krill genome figured out. So that's a little bit of news there. Now off to Australia for some really just good news, straight out good news. A story in reneweconomy.au, fellow on March 6th, a fellow by the name of Giles Parkinson. There's a story in there. South Australia enjoys 80.1% wind and solar share in blackout-free summer. And basically, South Australia now gets 80% of all their electricity just from wind and sun. Period. So all these pro-nukers that say, oh, you've got to have nukes for baseline, for base load, that's wrong. Australia, the entire continent of Australia, has never had a nuclear power plant. So A. And then B, all the pro-nukers say, oh, wind and sun are intermittent. You can't have a stable grid. Well, it turns out that not only did they get 80% of their power from wind and sun, but they had the most reliable grid in all of Australia.
Wow.
They had fewer blackouts than any of the other provinces. And they also had the least expensive power because wind and sun are cheaper than nuclear or
Yes,
coal
they are.
or natural gas. And they went from being an importer. South Australia used to have to import power from the only other province they're connected to is Victoria. And they used to import power from Victoria when they were dependent on coal and natural gas. They had a peak, but now they export. Now because they've got so many, the basis of this is household solar panels. That's why they've got such a high penetration, because they have, about 40% of the households have solar panels on them. Actually, wind is the biggest supplier. Wind was 46%, and solar was 26%. But all this is just from the year 2008. They only had 2.6% of their power coming from wind and sun. Now they're at 80.1%. So they're on their way to 100%. It's a stated goal. And compared to the rest of the subcontinent, the rest of Australia is about 38.9%, so 39%, 40%. So they're double what the rest of the continent is, but they're doing great. And so once again, good on you, South Australia. Thank you for leading the way. And as you might predict, or you might expect, the pro-nukers are scrambling. They're saying, we've got to get some nukes going in Australia because we can't have a whole continent proving that everything we're saying about baseload power and all that stuff's a lie. So they're really lobbying hard to get the government there to go nuclear. But hopefully that enough of the people of Australia will resist that it doesn't happen. Okay, now right back here to Ohio and East Palestine again. Latest story was in The Guardian. It was, March 4th. And the title is Plan to Incinerate Soil from Ohio Train Derailment is, quote, horrifying, says expert. This is an article by Tom Perkins. And apparently what they're planning to do is just take the contaminated soil, and the EPA has just decided not to test for PFAS or dioxins, which are almost certainly in there.
Okie doke.
And just real quick and dirty ship it over to this company called Heritage Thermal Services, which is located about 10 miles from East Palestine, and just burn it and put it up through the smokestack. And it turns out that this Heritage Thermal Services had 200 air pollution violations between 2010 and 2014. They're still paying fines on all that. 8 of the last 12 quarters, they exceeded all the air quality levels that they're supposed to maintain with their incineration services. And there's a huge question of if you can actually successfully incinerate PFAS or dioxins, or if you're just going to waft it right back up into the air.
Is there any particular reason to think that will make it go away? I mean, or is it just like, we're going to do this because we can't think of anything else?
Theoretically, if you hold the temperature high enough for long enough, you could destroy dioxins, but it's very tricky. There's a lot of weird chemistry involved, and it's much more likely that they're going to fail, and especially if they're not testing for it, either above at the smokestack or what's going in. There's almost no way they're going to succeed in actually destroying the dioxins. So really, you need to use something like supercritical thermal oxidation or something like that. But yeah, so this is not looking too good, folks. It looks like they're just trying to sort of do the quickest and easiest thing to say, hey, the problem's solved. So we'll see what happens there. This story, now here we have an environmental sports story, which is kind of sad, but turns out that a lot of the former Phillies players are getting the same kind of brain cancer. They're getting glioblastoma multiforme, which also happens to be the same kind of cancer my own father died of a long time ago. But ex-Phillies players are getting this brain cancer at 6 times the normal rate. And they were, listed as having died of it as a Tug McGraw, Darren Paulton, John Vukovic, Johnny Oates, Ken Brett, and Dan Quisenberry have all died of this rare brain cancer. And the theory that's being put forward is it was their exposure to the Astroturf.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, because
wow.
Astroturf is plastic. And what happens in the summer, that green is actually more efficient at absorbing heat or solar energy than black is, believe it or not. This Astroturf can heat up to 160 degrees.
Whoa.
And when you start heating plastic to those temperatures,
yeah,
it starts outgassing all kinds of nasty stuff, including PFAS. And
several 5 or 6 large dudes are on top of you, holding you right down to the Astroturf as it off gasses right in your face.
Well, this is baseball, not football.
Oh, okay.
No,
I'm sorry.
In fact,
I was confused.
In fact, they didn't find the same correlation with football, which
that's good.
Played in cooler weather.
Yeah, they deserve a break. The football play, they got enough problems.
So this is a bit of a controversy. Monsanto makes Astroturf, and so there might be some repercussions on all this for Monsanto, but it's not looking. It looks pretty bad because it's a rare cancer, and a whole bunch of Phillies are dying from it, and it's one of those ones that you get, and the doctors just sort of throw up their hands and say there's nothing we could do really because they don't know what to do with that particular cancer. So let's hope they find some answers there in Philadelphia. All right, so hopping over to Greenland. Last week while we were doing this show, Greenland was having a heat wave.
Oh my.
In fact, it was 50 degrees above normal there. And as we were doing the show here in Toledo, it was actually colder in Nuuk, Greenland, which is the capital of Greenland. It was 59.4 degrees. It was like 60 degrees. And that was the highest temperature ever recorded in Greenland for either March or April. So it broke all kinds of records. There is something called the Greenland block that can form if the polar vortex gets knocked off its usual route. And we did a show a few years back with a meteorologist who explained how that worked. But the polar vortex got knocked off, so it was colder here than it should have been, and it got way hotter in Greenland than it should be. And so people are very worried that this is going to cause that the heat wave is so severe that it's going to be record snow melt this year.
So is this sort of like the polar axis is more or less careening on its axis at this point, like a bicycle it's about to fall over? Is that what is going on?
The polar vortex?
Yeah, that's what I'm picturing it as.
Yeah, well, it's supposed to be bound very close to the North Pole. It's supposed to just sort of spin around the North Pole, and it's held in place by the jet stream. And what's happening is the jet stream's getting all wibbly-wobbly. Instead of a nice tight circle, it's making this big, loopy, kind of semicircle-ish
like a bicycle that's about to fall over.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
And so that knocks it off the pole, and that exposes Greenland to higher temperatures and exposes other places to lower temperatures, just as the predictions were said. This was all predicted in the simulations way back since the year 2000. So none of this is a surprise except for the rate. The scientists are surprised at the rate that this is happening because, as we've said before, they haven't taken into account the positive feedback loop. Right. Yeah. So, all right, we're working on that. Okay. Let's see. We got about 3 minutes time for one more story, and the question is which one? I guess we'll go with the story about TEPCO wanting to dump millions of gallons of radioactive water into the Pacific, and that is being challenged now by a number of other countries. And it's basically what they want to do is take all those tanks and just dump the radiation into the water, which kind of makes you wonder, why did you save them in the first place? And we have covered this story before, in that the National Marine Laboratories in the United States, all the biologists are saying, don't do this, because the radiation will concentrate in the animals and the fish, and it will kill them and harm whoever eats those fish. Now, physicists all say, oh, this is no problem at all, because it'll just go into the Pacific and dilute. But physicists have this terrible way of forgetting that biology exists. You know, they look at the old joke is, they ask a physicist to describe a cow, and the physicist says, well, let's first assume the cow was a sphere.
Let's not, but it's not actually a sphere.
But we're not spheres, right? So this is causing some big controversy, a lot of conflict in the Pacific nations. If they get away with it, then they will also start dumping radioactive water into the Hudson, which is what Holtec wants to do, and Boston Harbor, which Holtec wants to do. And then if they get away with that, they'll dump it into Lake Michigan from the Palisades nuclear plant. So we have to say no. We have to stop it in Japan. We have to stop it in the U.S.
Hands off my lake.
Thank you. So, all right, that's it for this week. Thanks so much for listening. This is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood.
We are signing off.
I don't want no oil a-spoiling my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!